Hey, shalom, shalom from your Dutch Uncle John, here to tell you what it is in the Hebrew alphabet. Today we're going to cover the letter Vav. I told you in previous videos that every Hebrew letter has a partner. And we started with Aleph, and you would suspect that the partner of Aleph would be Bet. This is where we get the Aleph Bet, alphabet. But God's ways are so far above our ways, and his thinking is so far above our thinking, that he partners the Aleph with the final letter, the Tav. We've got videos on these. Well, because that's happened, each letter is partnered with its one next to it, which causes the Vav to be partnered with the Zayin. Okay, that would be the 6th and 7th letter. Okay, so let's talk about the Vav today. The letter Vav, its picture is a hook or a nail. Okay, it's also the Hebrew word Vav means a nail or a hook. All right, and Vav also represents an upright man. Okay, Vav, its gematria value is 6. And as we know, 6 is the number of man. Man was created on day 6. There's an evil man coming. His number is 666. Okay? So, when you think of Vav, nail, hook, or upright man, the sound that a Vav makes, there's multiple. One, obviously, is the V sound, as in visit. Okay? It also makes the oo sound, as in new. It can also make an O sound, as in York. O, or long O even. Okay, so it makes lots of different sounds. Also, there are certain Hebrew speakers who use the Vav and they pronounce it as a W, or the Wa sound. This is where we get, some people refer to him as Yahweh, and some people refer to him as Yehovah. It's the same letter. Sometimes it's a Wa with a W sound. Sometimes it's the V, Yehovah. Okay, and it's your preference, I think. We're not going to know until we meet him how he likes to be addressed, how it's pronounced. The first time we see a Vav is in Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. That 6th word, what a coincidence, the 6th word has the Vav, and it shows up as the word va'et. It leads that word. Now, what does a Vav do? A Vav, think about it, a nail connects things. So in Hebrew, whenever you have a Vav in front of a word, it's used as the word and. Last night for dinner I had meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, pecan pie. Va. You hear the va in there, that's and. In Genesis 1:1, it's used as an and to connect the heavens, va'et haaretz, the heavens and the earth. The vav is the word and, which, if it's an upright man also, not only is it a nail connecting, but it's also an upright man. And this upright man is connecting the heavens and the earth. The spiritual is the heavens, and the physical is the earth. You see how that works? Okay? And who is this upright man that connects the two? It is no other one but Yeshua HaMashiach. In Genesis 1:1, there are 28 letters. Vav shows up as the 22nd letter, which kind of lets you know that of the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the Vav is kind of the connector that connects them. Vav, by the way, is not the most used letter, but it's the 2nd most used letter in the Torah. Yod is the most used at 31,532, or 22, sorry. Vav is the second most used at 30,509 times. And it's interesting that if you take the third most used letter, which is He, 28,052 times, those three letters you use to spell God's name, the Yud, He, Vav, He. Interesting that he would choose the three most common letters to spell his name. And as I said, you can pronounce the V, the Vav as a V, Yahovah, or you can pronounce it as a W, Yahweh. Okay? What it is not Jehovah. There's no J in Hebrew. And if you take the meanings of these letters, the Yod, remember, is hand. The He is He. Something is going to be revealed. A blessing, a revelation is coming. And the letter Vav, we said, was a nail. So with a nail, then the final letter is another He. So Yud, He, Vav, He would be the hand reveals, the nail reveals. Who's that? The hand reveals, the nail reveals. Now think about this. I'm just some guy, okay, and I'm studying the Bible, and I come across that these four letters reveal, the hand reveals, the nail reveals. Who's that pointing to? It's pointing to Yeshua HaMashiach. Do you think God did not see this when he was putting together these letters for his name? He's God. He saw it. Another place where we see a Vav is in Yeshua's name. It's Yud, Shin, Vav, Ayin. And Yeshua, we said, is the Mashiach, the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah. And we know something about the Messiah, and that is that he's going to sit at the right hand of God. And I've shown you this before, but here's a picture of God's right hand. And notice the Yod is the thumb. The next three fingers form a shin. The pinky forms a Vav. And this Y shape in your palm forms an Ayin. So you actually have Yeshua's name sitting at the right hand of God. Another place that we've seen this Vav is in the letter Aleph. Remember, the letter Aleph is made up of two Yods, right? There's a Yod up above. This is God's hand. Yod is the letter representing hand. You have another Yod down below reaching up. This is man's hand. And God's hand and man's hand cannot connect because one is perfect and one is not. And what they need is something to connect them. They need a nail. They need an upright man who will humble himself, thus connecting the spiritual and the earth, physical, the heavens and the earth, God and man. And this upright man is, of course, again, Yeshua HaMashiach. How beautiful is this? All right. Okay, let's look at some other places where we see the Vav. In Genesis 1:27, it says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created him. He created them, sorry. Okay, that last line here, it says, male and female, he created them. In Hebrew, that's Zakar va Nekabah. The Vav is and. So you have male, va, female. You see it? No problem there. Okay. Now, I want to do a little side note here and just remind you of something. The word Aish in Hebrew is an Aleph Shin. And each letter has a meaning. Aleph is strength. Shin is destruction. What is strong destruction? What destroys everything? The answer is fire. Aish. We get the word ash from this. And this is a picture of God. It's his judgment. When we see him in the burning bush, that fire, that's God. And we are made in his image. So when he made man, the word for man is Aleph, Yod, Shin, Ish. Notice, it's the same letters as fire, but he put his Yod down inside it. And for woman, it also is made in the fire's image. It has a Aleph, Shin, Hey at the end, forming Isha. Okay? Isha is a feminine ending of girls' names today. And Ish, it's a suffix representing man. You see it in Swedish or Danish, Finnish, a Finn man, a Swede man, a Dane man. And look, it's kind of interesting, the two letters that he added a Yud and a Hey to the fire to make man and woman. Yod Hey spells Yah. That's God's name. How clever. He inserted his name into the fire to form man and woman. Okay, but the point I want to make here is that the feminine ending is the letter Hey. Okay, whenever you have a Hey on the end of something, a feminine suffix. Well, we have God's name, the Yud Hey Vav Hey. And we see the Vav in there. A Vav, we said, represents and. The first two letters, Yud Hey, spell Yah, and I think this represents the male aspect of God, the Yah. And his name ends in a Hey, that's a feminine ending, so we see that these man and woman were created in the image of God. Not only was man, but woman. It says he created them, plural. Okay? So in his name, he has a hint of male and female. There it is. I'm not saying God is a female. God is not. God is a male, but God does have some feminine attributes, especially if you look at the complex unity, right? The complex unity is the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. In Hebrew, some words are masculine, some words are feminine. The word ruach is a feminine word in Hebrew. Okay, so there is a feminine aspect to God. Now, these vavs that we're talking about, representing and, I looked for a verse, Numbers 7:1. And it came to pass on the day Moses finished setting up the tabernacle that he anointed it and sanctified it, and all its vessels, and the altar, and all its vessels, and he anointed them, and sanctified them. You can see throughout the verse, all these words, and, vav, vav, vav. Okay? Now, how do you know when a word that begins with vav, is it its own word, or is it representing the word and? It turns out there are only 3 words in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, the Torah, or the Tanakh, that begin with a vav. One of them is Genesis 11:30. Sarai was barren. This was Abraham's wife before she had her name changed to Sarah. Sarai was barren. She had no child. That word for child is valad. And as I said, some people might pronounce it walad with a W. The next one is Exodus 27:10. It's talking about the building of the tabernacle. And its pillars shall be 20, and there are 20 sockets of bronze. The hooks of the pillars and their bands shall be of silver. That word for hooks is vavi. That's plural. Vav, vav, yod. So the word vav for hook is a Hebrew word. It begins with a vav. And the last one is Proverbs 21:8. It says, the way of a guilty man is crooked, but as for the pure, his conduct is upright. That word for guilty is vazad. Okay, vazar, I'm sorry. It's a resh on the end. Vav, zayin, resh. Vazar is guilty. So it's very rare that a word begins with a vav that's not and. Okay? So don't be worried about that. Now, you know Genesis 1:1. We've covered that to death. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashemayim va'et haaretz. The first word, Bereshit, begins with a bet. Every other verse in Creator Week, and Creator Week starts with Genesis 1:1 and it ends with Genesis 2:3. That covers the 7 days of creation. Every verse in Creator Week, except for Genesis 1:1, begins with a vav. So it's a rather important letter. In fact, if you go through the first 5 chapters of the Bible, it's very rare. There are a few, but there are almost every verse begins with a vav. Okay? Now, the vav does many things besides just making the sound that it makes and representing and. And here's a good example. In Genesis 1:3, it says, and God said, be light, and light was. Okay? In Hebrew, Vayomer Elohim, Yehi Or, Vayi Or. Now, we've talked many times about this complex unity, that there is a Father, there is a Son, and there is a Spirit. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that's the Father. Genesis 1:2, you have, and the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God hovered, fluttered over the waters, over the face of the deep. So in verse 1 you have the Father, verse 2 you have the Spirit. It logically leads that verse 3 would somehow refer to the Son. And it says in verse 3, and God said, be light. Well, Yeshua Jesus, who claims to be the Son of God, who is also God, he claimed and said, I am the light of the world. So we do have the complex unity showing up in the first 3 verses of the Torah, of the Bible, of the Old Testament. All of the above. Okay, now the reason I want to bring this one up is, let's tear this verse apart. Vayomer Elohim. Vayomer, notice, begins with a vav. There it's and God said. And Elohim is God, right? Vayomer Elohim, and said God. Yehi or is the word for light. Yehi is the verb be. And in Hebrew, if you have a verb and you put a vav in front of it, it can change from present tense to future tense. Or likewise, it can change from future to past. Okay? So here, it's changing it from present to past tense. Yehi or, be light, and vayi or, light was. That vav changed it to past tense. Notice they're the same words, yud he yud, yud he yud. But you put a vav in front of it and it becomes was. So that's one of the cool things that vav does. Another cool thing is Psalms 119, verse 40 through 48. I'll read a verse here. May your loving devotion come to me, O Lord, your salvation according to your promise. You know, as I'm looking through in English, nothing stands out spectacular. But Psalm 119 is a very unique psalm. First of all, it's the longest chapter of any book in the Bible. I know when I was a kid sitting in church, and if I didn't have a pencil or pen to doodle on the program, I wasn't paying attention. But sometimes I would resort to looking at the Pew Bible and just going through and finding oddities. What's the shortest verse? John 11:35. What's the longest verse? Esther 8:9. what's the longest chapter, etc., etc. And Psalm 119 was by far the longest chapter. It has 176 verses in it. And I noticed that above every so many verses, they had some kind of little mark. I didn't know what those marks were. I've later found out that that's the Hebrew alphabet. And if we start in Psalm 119, verse 1, 1 through 8, here it is. Blessed are those who is blameless. Blessed are those who keep his testimonies. Again, nothing spectacular, but when you write it in Hebrew, remember Hebrew goes right to left, notice that every verse of the first 8 all begin with an aleph. And that little aleph was the symbol that was sitting on top of that first 8 verses. Then the next 8 verses all begin with bet. The next 8 verses all begin with gimel. Understand? And by the time you get down to verse 40, all 8 verses begin with a vav. See, this would not be easy to do in English because you'd have to have 8 verses beginning with an X, or 8 verses beginning with a Z, or a Q. Not easy to do in English, but in Hebrew, very cool there. Another cool thing that the vav does is if you put the vav at the end of a noun, it makes it masculine possessive. Here's an example. Proverbs 34 asks the question, what is his name? We can tear this verse apart and figure out it's only two, that part of it is only 2 words. Okay? In Hebrew, it's ma shemu. Ma, we've told you before, means what? 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 Yes, ma means what? Remember when the Jews were out in the wilderness and they had no food and they come out of their tents one morning and all over the ground was this white stuff. And they looked at it and they said, ma, na, what is it? And God said, yes, that's what we're going to call it. It's mana. Mana means, what is it? And I told you I have Jewish friends that I visit. And the son, like any son, is back in his bedroom, and mom is in the kitchen, and he's yelling something in Hebrew from the bedroom, and she can't understand what he's saying, and he doesn't come out and talk to her, and she yells, Ma! What? Okay, so we know ma is what? Next word we have shemu. Shem is the Hebrew word for name. Remember, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And I can just imagine when the first one came out, I believe they were triplets, by the way, because it says that Noah had Shem, Ham, and Japheth in his 500th year. So in just 1 year, he had 3 sons. It's a good chance that they was at least twins, and probably triplets. But the first one comes out, and he asks his wife, what name should we give him? And the word for name in Hebrew is Shem. What Shem should we give him? And I'm sure the wife, okay, well, let's call him Shem. Let's call him name. So Ma, Shem, and you put a vav on the end, it makes the U sound, and that makes it masculine possessive. His name. Ma Shemu, what his name. If you read the next line in Proverbs 34, it asks a really telling question. I would like a Jew to answer this. And what is the name of his son? Well, we can read this one too. Vama, notice there's a va in front. That's and what. Shem is name. Benu, Ben is the Hebrew word for son. You put a vav on the end, and it becomes his son. And what name his son? Vama Shem Benu. Very clever. I have a video, it's only 15 minutes or so, on Proverbs 30, verse 4 through 6. But if you put that whole verse in a grid, it also answers the question, what is his name? And right there in the middle, it has Hashem, the name. That's what the Jews call God, Hashem. Hey, Shin, Mem. And vertically through Hashem, it has Yeshua, Yud, Shin, Vav, Ayin. And the two form a cross. And sitting on top of that cross, you have, I have in gold here, Ruach, Resh, Vav, Chet. That spells spirit. How clever that you have, what is his name and what is his son's name? And they've got the Father, Hashem, you got Yeshua the Son, you got the Ruach sitting up on top. It forms the shape of a cross. You just can't, the Jews would have never hidden that in there. They would not. Only God could have put that. Okay, another cool thing with the Vav is back when they built the tabernacle. And here's just a rough sketch of the tabernacle. It was made up, first of all, it was like a whole compound with curtains around the whole enclosure. And those curtains were hung on hooks the whole way around. And there was one way in and out of the whole compound. And that should not be surprising because there is only one way to God, right? The one way to God is through Yeshua HaMashiach. Jesus' finished work on the cross. The blood, perfect blood sacrifice that God himself left his throne, came to earth and provided for us because we needed it. There's no more perfect blood. One way to God. And that's a picture of the tabernacle having one door. There's one way to God. And when you entered that door as a priest, the first thing you would encounter is the brazen altar. Notice the first thing God requires, all right, what's your sacrifice? That's the first thing. What's your sacrifice? Then the next thing is the laver. A laver was a big metal container that held water where you would bathe, and the priest would bathe and put on clean clothes before he actually entered the tabernacle. Notice the order. The first you need a brazen altar, then you need a laver. What's the point? There are people who say, well, I'd love to come to church with you, but I've got to clean up my life first. No. That's the wrong order. First, you need your sacrifice. You need to claim the blood of Jesus. Then you clean up your life. That's the order they have here. Brazen altar first, then the laver. If you wait till you clean up your life before you try to make a relationship with God, guess what? It ain't going to happen. We can't clean up our lives. Our lives have problems. We need that blood sacrifice to cover those sins and those problems. Then you finally enter into the tabernacle, and it was divided into two sections, the holy place and the holy of holies, and there was a veil, a curtain separating them. When you enter the tabernacle into the holy place, you had the menorah on the left, 7-branch candlestick. You had the table of showbread on the right. Straight ahead, you had an altar of incense where the incense was burning 24 hours a day. The incense that went up was like praise and prayers to God. Then there was the veil. And once a year, the high priest would sacrifice an animal, go into the tabernacle, go behind the veil, and in that Holy of Holies, there was the Ark of the Covenant. And sitting on top of the Ark of the Covenant was the mercy seat. It was two angels with their wings in toward each other, looking down at the mercy seat. This is the place where God would reside in the tabernacle. Okay? Notice, in total, there were 7 pieces of furniture. 7, we say, is God's perfection, completion. There's a brazen altar, laver. There's inside the menorah, table of showbread, altar of incense. Behind the veil is the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat. 7 total pieces of furniture. Now, this whole compound, oh, by the way, that veil that separated the holy place and the Holy of Holies. I was talking to a Catholic friend once, and we were it must have been around Easter time, and I mentioned something about the veil being rent. And she said, what does that even mean? And I reminded her that whenever Yeshua Jesus was crucified, that's what it's referring to. It says, and the veil was rent. Well, she knows what a veil is, and she knows if you rend something, you tear it. But she didn't put the two and two together because she didn't know that there was this veil in the tabernacle. And when that, or also in the temple, when it became a permanent structure there in Jerusalem. But she didn't know that when Jesus is crucified, that veil tore down the middle. And that veil, they say, was as thick as a hand's width. So it's a pretty thick veil for it just to tear by itself. There was also an earthquake. There was the sun went dark. The earth went dark. Okay, so that was a picture of, prior to Jesus being crucified, if you wanted to get to God, well, first of all, you couldn't get back there to the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest could once a year. And he would take the blood, and he would go back there in your stead, and he would pour the blood on, and the sins of the entire nation would be forgiven. But you personally didn't have access to God Almighty. But when Yeshua Jesus died on the cross, the veil was rent. Now we can go boldly to the throne of God. That veil is no longer there separating us from God. And the reason we can get there is because of Yeshua Jesus' sacrifice. But I digress. Let's go and look at that whole compound. I told you that the whole thing was surrounded by these curtains, and each curtain hung on a hook. Well, in Hebrew, that hook was called a vav. And if you have many hooks, you have vavim. Very cool. So these white sheets were all around hanging on vavim. Got it? Well, let's look at a Torah scroll. You know what the Torah is, the first 5 books of the Bible. And when they write a Torah scroll, it's written on, I don't want to say parchment. It's actually what they call vellum. Or it's animal skin that's been treated, and it's just beautiful. Okay, very soft and very, very beautiful. And they take the ink and they write in columns on this scroll, and it's one long continuous scroll. Okay, and each group has, or each page has justified on both sides the writing, and there's another one next to it, next to another one, and that looks like those sheets that are hanging in the around the tabernacle. Now, you will notice that the first letter of every column on a Torah scroll is a vav, except for one. Genesis 1:1 we know begins Bereshit bara Elohim. It begins with a bet, and bet represents Ben. Ben is the Son. The whole book, the whole Old Testament, the whole New Testament, the whole Bible is about the Son, the Ben. So, but every other column begins with a vav, because they're and it's connecting the previous writing with the next column, and the next column, and the next column. Make sense? Beautiful. Okay. Another place where we've seen the vav, because sometimes he'll do funny little things with the vavs, with all the letters, but I want to point out some of the ones he did with vav. In Genesis 2:4, it says, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that Yahweh God made the heaven and the earth and the heavens." That word for generations is toldot. Notice it's a tav, a vav, a lamed, dalet, vav, tav. Those 6 letters spell generations, toldot. And Genesis 2:4 is prior to Genesis 3. Genesis 3 is the fall of man, when the serpent comes to Adam and Eve in the garden. Okay? So here, the world is still perfect. He made it perfect. He made Adam and Eve perfect. And their generations are perfect. And notice there are two vavs in this word. Okay? Now in chapter 3, man falls and sin enters the world. Now we jump ahead to Genesis 5:1. It says, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created Adam, he made him in the likeness of God." Now that word generations is toldot, but it's not spelled the same. There is a vav missing. So now the generations are lacking an upright man. Someone needs to come and fix the problem that happened in Genesis chapter 3. Well, from now on, throughout the Torah, toldot will always be spelled with a missing vav until you get to Ruth 4:18. There it says, "Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron," and it continues. Okay, who's Perez? Well, remember the story of Judah and Tamar. Judah had 3 sons. Tamar married the first. He died. Tamar tried to marry the second one. He didn't want anything to do with her. He died. Judah didn't want to give the third son because this woman's the kiss of death. So she doesn't get the third son, and time goes by, and she's committed to this family. So she dresses like a prostitute, and she entices Judah, the father, to come in and sleep with her. And she gets pregnant with twins, Zerah and Perez. Perez came out first. So Perez, to Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram Amminadab, and Amminadab was born Nahshon, to Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. We have now established the messianic line because the Messiah is going to be the son of David. And because of this illicit relationship between Judah and her daughter-in-law and his daughter-in-law, that messianic line got established. Now, if you read 4:18, it says, "Now these are the generations toldot of Perez." There, the missing vav has been reestablished. It's back in there. They have 2 vavs because the messianic line has been established. Very nice. And just those first 2 words in this verse 18 say, "Now these are the generations." There it is right there. And if you put the gematria values in for that, it adds up to 888. Why is that a big deal? Because Yeshua, Jesus' name in the Greek also has gematria. It's called isosophy. But in Greek, Eusus, Jesus' name, also adds up to 888. He is that missing vav. He is that Messiah who's reestablished the line. Very beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, let's look at Jeremiah 6:14. It says, "They have healed the brokenness of my people superficially, saying peace, peace, but there is no peace." Wow, we got 3 times peace shows up in this verse. The word for peace, you probably know, shalom. And shalom has a vav in it. Okay? The 4 letters that make up the word shalom is a shin, lamed, vav, mem. Shin, we already talked about, meant destruction. Destruction. Shin is tooth. Shen is tooth. And it means destruction. Wow, that's interesting that the word peace starts out with a letter that represents destruction or destroying. The lamed is the shepherd's crook, right? If you're the shepherd, you have the authority. And lamed has to do with shepherd. It has to do with authority. It also has to do with learning and teaching. If you're the authority, you can be a teacher, right? So now you have a vav. Vav, we know, is a nail which connects things. And mem, the mem is the letter that represents water. And water represents chaos. It's always moving and turning and churning and rolling. And okay, so if you look at the four letters, you have destroy, you have lamed, authority, you have vav, which is a nail to join or attach, and you have mem, which is chaos. So if you look at shalom, if you want the peace, the shalom of God, you are to destroy the authority that's attached to your chaos. You have chaos in your life. What's ruling that chaos? And whatever it is, you need to destroy it. And you will have shalom. You will have and find the peace of God. Very nice lesson there. Let's look at Numbers 25, starting in verse 1. This is a time while Israel remained at Shittim, and the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. Let me interrupt for a moment and just remind you, God told the Jews, stick with the Jews. Don't be intermarrying or intermingling with these other foreign people who have foreign gods. But Israel did not listen, and they began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. For they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. I don't blame him. Verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor. Then behold, one of the sons of Israel came and brought to his relatives a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the sons of Israel, while they were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Tent of meeting is the tabernacle. So they're all worried and complaining, and they're going to execute all these people for intermingling with the foreigners. And while they're discussing and debating and planning the execution, an Israelite shows up with a daughter, a woman of Midian, and goes into their tent. I mean, it's blatant disregard for the rules. Verse 7, Numbers 25. When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he arose from the midst of the congregation and took a spear into his hand. And he went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman through the body, so that the plague on the sons of Israel was checked. And those who died by the plague were 24,000. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not destroy the sons of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace. And it shall be for him and his descendants after him a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the sons of Israel. Okay, so this Jewish man, Israelite, he shows up with a Midianite woman, goes into his tent, blatant disregard for the rules. Phinehas, and God is punishing the Israelites for this behavior on the whole. He's having them executed. And Phinehas, a good Israelite, he is jealous for God. And it says that he was the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest. Aaron, if you remember, Aaron is the brother of Moses. He was the first high priest. He had a son, Eleazar. Eleazar has a son, Phinehas. Okay, so he's just 1-2. He's the grandson of Aaron the high priest. And he goes in and he runs them through with a sword, both the Israelite and the Midianite woman. It gives their names in verse 14. The man's name was Zimri, the son of Salu, and the name of the Midianite woman who was slain was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur. All right. But the point that I want to make on this is verse 12. It says, therefore, tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. I have it here in the Hebrew. Do you notice anything about that verse? I will tell you this, my covenant, the word covenant is brit. And here he has, the next to the last word is brit. It's actually briti, because it has a yud on the end. That's my covenant. If you saw the yod video, when a word ends in yod, it's my brit. And the last word is shalom. If you look closely at shalom, I'll make it a little bit bigger. What do you notice about shalom, the last word? It's a shin, lamed, a vav, and a mem. Notice the vav, something odd about that vav. It's broken. It's in two pieces. Wow, what's up with that? Okay. What this is showing is that he's getting a piece, but that piece, it came at a cost. Okay, somebody had to be killed, and God was killing, what, 24,000 of them? Okay, and Phinehas was jealous for his God. If we look at John 2:17, his disciples, talking about Jesus, his disciples remembered that it was written, zeal for your house will consume me. Remember, Jesus went into the tabernacle, to the temple, and he overturned the money changers' tables, right? And whipped and beat them and threw them out. Was that wrong of Jesus to do that? Is it wrong to take a whip and beat people and chase them out? Not if it's in God's temple. If you're fighting for that cause that is divine, God is not upset with you. Psalm 69:9, for zeal for your house has consumed me, and the reproaches of those who reproach you have fallen on me. So he wants us to have zeal for him, for his tabernacle, for his temple, for his name. Phinehas is a type of Yeshua, in that both of them were broken for the sake of a covenant of peace for the atonement of Israel. Yeshua came and was broken. He died on the cross. And Phinehas, he went in and people had to die. It was sad, but people had to die. Okay, here's another cool place where you'll see the where Vav does something a little different. You know the prophet Elijah. In Hebrew, his name Eliyahu. And it's, you can break his name down. Aleph Lamed, that's El, that's God. And then Yud-Hey spells Yah, that's his name. So Eliyahu, God is Yah. It's letting you know who God is, Yahweh, Jehovah. Elijah's name appears 71 times in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh. And it's usually spelled Aleph, Lamed, Yod, Hey, Vav. Eliyahu. You hear that U on the end. That's the Vav. But there are 5 times where Eliyahu's name is spelled without that Vav on the end. 4 times in 2 Kings chapter 1, and 1 time in Malachi 4:5. So why is his name misspelled, missing a Vav? To answer that, we're going to go back to Genesis 37:34. It says, so Jacob, Yaakov, remember Jacob, Abraham had Isaac, Isaac has Jacob. So Jacob tore his clothes and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. Jacob's name is Yaakov. It's a Yod, Ayin, Kuf Bet. And that's how it's normally spelled throughout the Torah, throughout the Old Testament. But there are 5 times where Jacob has an extra vav in his name. Yod, Ayin, Kuf, Vav, Bet. Leviticus 26 and 4 times in Jeremiah. So, why does Jacob have this extra vav 5 times, and Elijah, why is he missing a vav 5 times? Now, the sages and the rabbis, they'll say that, in the, it's the last verse of the Old Testament. Malachi 4, 5, and 6. He says, "Behold, I am going to send Eliyahu the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord." So it's promised that Elijah is going to come before the Messiah shows up. Okay? And in that last verse, that last verse, he's missing a vav in that one. Okay? Elijah is. So why is Elijah coming back? The sages say that Elijah is going to return for his missing vav. Remember, Jacob got his name changed to Israel. And Elijah is going to come back to Israel before the great and terrible day of the Lord. And why is he coming back? To get his missing vav. Now, that's a cute story, and it does fit, okay? I'm not so sure he's coming to get his vav. I will tell you this. Elijah, one of the things he's known for is he had the Spirit of God in him, right? And there are verses in Ezekiel that talks about that he's going to scatter the Jews all over the world. That's Israel, right? Jacob gets his name to Israel or the Jews. That Israel gets scattered all over the world, and then God is going to bring them back. And what is he going to do when he brings them back? Ezekiel 11. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you out of the countries among which you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. When they come here, they will remove all its detestable things and all its abominations from it. And I will give them one heart and put a new spirit within them. And I will take the heart of stone out of their flesh and give them a heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them. Then they will be my people, and I shall be their God. So Jacob, the opportunist, the heel grabber, becomes Israel. He scattered because of disbelief and not following God's commands, but God made promises to Abraham, and he's going to keep them, and he's going to bring all those Israel back, and he's going to put a spirit in them, the same spirit that Elijah has. Okay? So there's the tie-in for those. What else we got here? Oh, there is a there's a verse, and many people talk about this, Leviticus 11:42. 11:42 has a vav in it, and that vav is very big, an enlarged vav. Okay? By the way, Leviticus 11:42 talks about dietary law, what you can eat and what you can and can't eat. And I think it talks about things that go along on their belly, you're not allowed to eat, okay? That crawl on their belly. And that word for belly is gashon, or gachon. And in that word gachon is that enlarged vav. It makes that O sound, gachon. Well, I've been watching and studying for years, and I'm always told that giant vav in Leviticus 11:42 is the middle letter of the entire Torah. Well, that's kind of cool that I know in the entire Torah there's 304,805 letters total. So if you put the one right in the middle, you would have an equal number on this side, you have an equal number on that side, and you have that big vav in the middle, and that vav represents and. So you have this many letters and this many letters. Got it? The problem is, and I never actually taught that because I never wanted to sit and count to make sure it's true. I assumed it was true because you hear it from everyone. But one day I counted. And let me tell you, the rabbis have a lot of it counted already. You can figure out, they already know how many letters there are in Genesis and how many in Exodus. So you add those together, well, you're more than halfway there. So it didn't take a whole lot of counting to figure out that, you know what? Leviticus 11:42, that vav is not the middle letter of the Torah. It's not even close. So why is everybody claiming that? And by the way, when you talk about middle of the Torah, are you talking about the middle letter? Or are you talking about the middle word? Because the middle word may not be the same as the middle letter. Or the middle letter may not be in the middle word. Right? Number of words and number of letters, completely different animals. Okay, so why are all the rabbis and why do they all sages say that it's the middle letter when it's not? Well, it turns out that there are a lot of these enlarged letters, and sometimes they're very small letters. We should do a talk on just the enlarged and diminished letters of the Torah. There are 17 of them total. The first one you should already know. It's Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elohim. That word Bereshit begins with an enlarged bet. Kind of like Once Upon a Time has that big O, right, in the storybook. So you can imagine that one. Genesis 2:4. Bereshit 2:4. Bahabarim has a diminished hey. Genesis 23:2 has a diminished kaf. And I have here's a bunch of them listed. And we also show, we're showing all 17 of them. And that Leviticus 11:42, it is the middle one of all the enlarged, diminished ones. You know, it would have been cool if it actually was the middle letter of the entire Torah and it showed up in the belly of the Torah and the word gachon, which means belly. That's all clever, super clever. It's still clever that it's in the belly of the enlarged and diminished, but it is not, I promise you, it is not the middle of the Torah. So if you hear somebody saying that, you tell them, liar, liar, pants on fire. Okay, now here's something a little bit you can do with what you want. You know, in fact, this last part here we're going to cover. We're going to make this one for all the conspiracy theorists. You know, those ones who the tinfoil hat guys who they're worried about the moonbeams penetrating their brain. Okay, and they're always looking at weird things. And this may be weird, it may not, you can decide. All right? But you've all seen this drink, right? The Monster energy drink. And its logo is a big M on the can. But if you actually look at that M, it looks like 3 vavs. Vav, vav, vav. In fact, the second and third vavs aren't touching. So that third one is definitely its own vav, not part of the M. Okay? And it's referring to monster, which is, you know, on the scary, demonic, mean, or ugly side, okay? Well, that's kind of interesting that vav, 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 remember vav is 6, so 3 of them would be 666. And we've got verses in the Bible that talk about 666, okay? One of them is Revelation 13:8. It says, here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Okay, well, there's your 666. And it says, let us calculate the number of the beast. Well, if you've noticed a Monster energy drink, its slogan is Unleash the Beast. Well, now that's getting even more a little bit weird, right? I mean, they blatantly have 666 on the front, 3 Vuvs, and Unleash the Beast. And what is this drink? It's full of chemicals and sugars and caffeine and not anything that's really probably good for you. It's a very artificial, that's it. It's an artificial drink. Okay? Revelation 20, starting in verse 7. When 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will come out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand on the seashore. In Revelation 13:4, it says, they worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him? You know, this beast is the Antichrist. The dragon is Satan. All right? And we have this beast who's going to show up. This is going to be sometime after the rapture. The rapture is when Yeshua, harpazo, he snatches away his bride, the believers. And those left on the earth, a leader is going to arise, this Antichrist, and he's going to be promoting peace, but there will not be peace. God said no one will rule the planet except for Yeshua, and that will be when Jesus comes back at the end of this tribulation period where this Antichrist is going to rule. So this Antichrist is referred to as the beast. His number is 666. You got a can here that says Unleash the Beast. You know, is that a coincidence? Is it conspiracy theory? I don't know. But while we're on the subject, we can look at their and anybody's web address. You know, it begins www.monsterenergy.com. While we're here, let me just show you. Remember, the letter Vav is a V, it can be an O, it can be a W, and it can be a U. Well, because it can be a W, if you look at this address, www. www in Hebrew would be Vav, 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 which is 666. Again, it's just odd that all their email addresses begin, or not email addresses, but web addresses all begin with www, Vav, 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 666. Are things setting up for this world leader? That's just something to consider. And while we're on the subject, have you ever noticed on a barcode, because the Monster drink has a barcode, as does anything you purchase. The barcode here, it starts out on the left with a 1, then it has 2 thin lines, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it has 2 thin lines that extend down low. Then it has 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 8. And then it has 2 thin lines that extend down halfway down the 8. And then there's a 1 on the side. Those 2 thin lines, anytime you see 2 thin lines next to each other in barcode talk, that is the number 6. And you can see that there are 3 pairs of these that extend down below all the other lines. The first, in the middle, and on the end. These are actually registration marks so that the scanner knows what lines to read, right? It's the ones between the long one and then the middle one and the long one. Well, those 2 thin lines is the number 6. So you really have a 6 at the beginning, you have a 6 in the middle, and you have a 6 at the end. And I'm not just picking on a Monster drink here. Every barcode has this. Those are the registration marks. Now, why did they use 666 for the registration marks on barcodes? I don't know. And it's something that the tinfoil hat people may not be too crazy. after all. All right? Okay. So, monster drink, I don't know. Unleash the Beast, a little odd to me. Now, whenever I think of Vav, I don't think of 666. I think of 3 nails. And if you take 3 nails and add 1 cross, it equals forgiven. Very nice. All right. Well, that concludes the letter Vav. Thanks for watching. To God be the honor. To God be the glory. To God be the praise. And let me tell you, we've got a bonus today. And we'll be right back with that. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Okay, welcome back. The bonus today is from the book of Esther, chapter 9. And let's start reading in verse 3. Now, if you remember the story of Esther, Esther was a Jew. She married the king of Persia. He does not know she's a Jew. She has a cousin named Mordecai. Mordecai is a very good Jew. And Haman is the king's right-hand man. And Haman is walking through town. Mordecai won't bow down to him. Haman is furious. So Haman gets permission from the king to kill all the Jews in the province. They get wind of this, and Esther has to go into the king and, hey, king, help. Because if your edict that you let Haman kill all the Jews, that means I, your wife, I'm a Jew. I'm going to be killed. Everybody dies. Which, not good. So, what happens? The king can't change his order, but he gives the Jews permission to fight back. And in Esther 9, it says, and the Jews do fight back, and they defeat those who were trying to kill them. In verse 3, even all the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who were doing the king's business assisted the Jews because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Indeed, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai became greater and greater. Thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to all those who hated them. At the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. And, so besides the 500 men, and Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poratha, Adalia, Eridatha, Parmashta, Erisai, Eridai, and Vizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the sons of Hamadatha, the Jews' enemy. But they did not lay their hands on their plunder. So, you had Haman, who tried to kill the Jews. He is now, his 10 sons are killed. And so was Haman. Haman was killed on a gallows. He's dead. And they killed Haman's 10 sons. Here are those verses 7, 8, and 9. Notice verses 7, 8, and 9 are just name, 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 name. Here that is in the Hebrew. And in front of each one, there is a Vav, Aleph Tav. Notice that every one of those names begins with a Vav, Aleph Tav. The Vav is and Aleph Tav. It says, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy. If you look at those 10 names closely, you will notice that there are some letters in here that are enlarged and some are diminished. In the first name, for example, you have a very small tav in Parshandatha's name. If you go down to Parmashta, he has a diminished shin. If you go all the way down to the last name, he has a diminished zayin. And in the last name, you have an enlarged vav. So there are four that are different size. That's amazing. In just 10 names, you have 4 large or small letters. Esther 9, starting in verse 11. On that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel was reported to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel in Susa. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. And what is your father's request? It shall also be done. Then said Esther, if it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa, to do according to the edict of today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. Well, now this is kind of interesting, because he's just telling Queen Esther, hey, the Jews killed 500 men, and they killed the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel in Susa. Now, Queen Esther, what was your petition? What would you like me to give you? And Esther turns around and says, if it pleases the king, let tomorrow also be granted to the Jews who are in Susa, to do according to the edict today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. He just told her Haman's 10 sons were hanged on the gallows. And what would you like me to do for you? And she says, yeah, I'd like Haman's 10 sons to be hanged on the gallows. It's like, hey, woman, you're not listening? I just told you his 10 sons were hanged on the gallows. But verse 14 says, so the king commanded it should be done. And an edict was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. Again, I guess, I don't know. Verse 15. Well, we don't need to read any more of those. The point has been made. She asked for something that had already been done. It didn't make sense. Okay. Now, why was that even in there? It doesn't make sense. Because she said, let tomorrow also be granted. Let it be tomorrow that this happens. Well, that tomorrow may not be actually the next day. Okay. And here's a cool thing here. You know, let's look at those small letters and that large letter. That large Vav, let's let that represent a 1,000-year period, a millennium. Okay? So, you know, if you look at the first 1,000 years from creation up to the year 1000, that's the first millennia. And from year 1000 to 2000 is the second millennia. The third to 2000 to 3000 is the third millennia. 3000 to 4000 is the fourth millennia. Down from the sixth millennia would go from year 5000 to year 6000. We're talking about a Hebrew calendar, right? They're in the year 5000 something. Okay, so if you're in the sixth millennia, you're in the year 5000 and something. So just keep that in mind, because in that last name we had a very large Vav, and that large Vav could represent the sixth millennia. The 3 small letters were a Tav, a Shin, and a Zayin. Tav is 400, Shin is 300, Zayin is 7. That adds up to 707. So you could conceivably get the Hebrew year 5707 by the hints of that large and small letters. The year 5707 on the Hebrew calendar equates on the Gregorian calendar to 1946. And she did say, may tomorrow his sons be hanged. Well, it turns out on the Tishri 21 of the year 5707, that's October 16th, 1946. It was the last day of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's what happened that day, you know, after World War II, they gathered up some of these Nazi leaders and they tried them in Nuremberg, Germany. And they were found guilty and they were sentenced to be hanged. One of those guys is a guy named Julius Streicher. I'm going to read his sentence that the judge pronounced on him. He says, for his 25 years of speaking, writing, and preaching hatred of the Jews, Streicher was widely known as Jew Baiter #1. In his speeches and articles, week after week, month after month, he infected the German mind with the virus of anti-Semitism and incited the German people to active persecution. Streicher's incitement to murder and extermination at the time when the Jews in the East were being killed under the most horrible conditions clearly constitutes persecution on political and racial grounds in connection with war crimes as defined by the Charter and constitutes a crime against humanity. Streicher, there were supposed to be 11 hanged on that day. And what day? October 16th, 1946. One of those 11 was Reich Marshal Hermann Goering. You know Goering, he was the head of the Luftwaffe, the Air Force, the German Air Force. And just prior to his hanging, he went to his cell. He had taken potassium cyanide tablet a few hours before, and he killed himself, which meant there were only 10 left to be hanged. And isn't it interesting that the request that the king made to Esther, what would you like? And she said, tomorrow, let these 10 be hanged on a gallows. She was not talking about the 10 sons of Haman. She was talking about other persecutors of the Jewish people. Jewish persecutors thousands of years in the future. Very, very cool. Very cool. Okay. Well, God bless. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Oh, one more thing. Today's shirt, I don't know if you can see it, it's black on black, but the city is Andheri. Andheri is northern Mumbai, India. And I chose this shirt today because Andheri begins and Vav. Bye-bye.